Okay, so today we're going to talk about the 5 characteristics of life. So before we get into those characteristics of life, we're going to watch this simple video, which is going to demonstrate some of those properties that we're going to discuss today. So on to the characteristics of life. The first thing we're going to talk about is organization. Living things are organized. Now, what do we mean by that? Living things are organized. When you look at this horse here, you'll notice that if you zoom into the fur of the horse, the foot of the horse, the nose or the ear or the tail, you're going to see that it's quite structured. And it's structured, it's organized. The smallest unit of the organism is the cell. And that cell is going to aggregate and create tissues. Those tissues aggregate to create organs, and organ systems are created from that, and so forth. So that's the organization that we're referring to. They're built on the building block of cells, and it builds up to different levels of organization, all the way up into the organism. So living things respond to stimuli. Now, anything that causes some change in an organism is referred to as a stimulus. The plural word for stimulus is stimuli. Now, we can't speak about stimulus and stimuli without referring to those external stimuli and internal stimuli. So in this example, the cat is responding to a stimulus. That stimulus is the broccoli here, it's the food. So that's an external stimulus. In this image, we have a picture of sweat. This is an athlete, a basketball player, he's sweating. So sweat is a response to stimulus. In this case, it's an internal stimulus. On the inside of the athlete's body, his temperature was raised, he got a little bit hot, and so his pores opened up to release some of the heat. So let's focus a little bit on the change that's taking place here. So anything that causes some change in an organism is a stimulus. Now that's important. That discussion on change is important because an organism has an internal environment and an external environment. And so when the external environment changes, we cannot allow those changes on the outside of the organism to change the inside of the organism. So we have this really cool system here, this cool mechanism called homeostasis. So an organism's ability to keep the proper conditions on the inside, no matter what's going on the outside of the organism, is called homeostasis. So it's actually snowing right now in Louisiana. And so if I go outside in this cold snow, it would be quite dangerous for me if the inside of my body became cold like the outside, like the snow on the outside of my body. But that doesn't happen because my body has this mechanism called homeostasis. So living things use energy. And energy is important because it's needed to maintain homeostasis. So the source of energy, the source of most energy is the sun. So most organisms receive energy either directly or indirectly from the sun in combination with raw materials that we use for nutrients. So looking at this plant here, this plant is receiving raw energy from, the plant has raw materials that it's taking in, such as carbon dioxide and water, but it's also receiving direct energy from the sun. Now, looking at this guy here, he's preparing some type of smoothie or shake. Now, he's not standing outside receiving direct energy from the sun, but the food that he's eating, which are plants, received their energy directly from the sun. So in turn, he's indirectly receiving energy from the sun. So living things grow and develop. So I'm just going to show a quick little video of the Lion King. And this is an example of growth and development. society. So in order for living things to grow and develop, the living organism must take in raw materials and use those materials as nutrients and a food and a source in order to feed its cells in order to grow. So we have the example of this puppy here. The puppies are drinking milk from their mother. It's a raw material. They're taking in the milk. They're nourishing their cells, and those cells grow and multiply. And eventually, you're going to have this adult dog here, which is the picture on the right. So we have a picture here of a celebrity. Now, who might this celebrity child grow and develop into? Orlando Bloom. So notice there are changes that took place in the life of Orlando Bloom to bring him from the child in this picture to the teen in this picture to the adult in this picture. There were changes, there was growth, there was development. So development will be defined as all of the changes that takes place during the life of an organism. So Orlando Bloom in this picture, I'm sure he was pretty short, but his height changed. His height grew, his height developed, and he became this young man right here. This young boy became this young man. And this young man, if you look at his face here, changed and grew and developed. He grew the hairs in his he grew hair. So there were mechanisms in his body that changed and developed, and in turn, he grew hair. So living things reproduce. This is a law of nature, guys. All living things must reproduce. We can talk about birds, we can talk about bees, and we can talk about trees. All living things must reproduce. So organisms reproduce to make more of its own kind. So we have bees reproduce and make more bees. You know, a bee is not going to reproduce and make a cat. A cat is not going to reproduce and make an alligator. Everything reproduces after its own kind. Now, reproduction is important because without reproduction, living things would not exist to replace those individuals that die. So if you look here at this plant, if this plant dies without reproducing, well, that plant species is going to be extinct. Looking at these animals here, if these animals die without reproducing, that animal species is going to be extinct. If you look here at this picture of the beach, if all of these humans die and don't make any more human beings, well, that would be the end of the human species. So in order to propagate life on Earth and proliferate life on Earth, living things must reproduce. So as a review, the 5 things that we discussed were organization, response to stimuli, the use of energy, growth and development, and reproduction. So following this simple PowerPoint, we're going to have a quiz. You're going to be required to name the 5 characteristics of life and define key vocabulary words within the PowerPoint. There's also going to be a multiple choice section in which I'm going to take the examples of each characteristic of life and I'm going to mix them up, and you're going to have to match the example of the characteristic of life with the characteristic of life. So have a good evening.